practices practiced by the Palestinian Arabs in Khan Yunis in Gaza, albeit in relation to West Timor in Indonesia. And he systematically analysed the terrible consequences that come from using human beings as human shields. Again, the double standard. When it came to West Timor, that practice was condemned. When it came to the Palestinian Arabs, it was given a pass. From Kofi Annan himself. This was the same Kofi Annan who not long after that attended a Nakba Day commemoration. Nakba means catastrophe. The Palestinian Arabs commemorate Nakba Day on the anniversary of the resolution passed in the United Nations General Assembly recommending that the then British Mandate territory of Palestine be divided into an Arab state and a Jewish state. That they regard as a catastrophe. He stood there together with the President of the General Assembly and the President of the Security Council in front of a map of the Middle East which showed that Israel did not exist. This was the Secretary General of the United Nations giving his imprimatur to a map wiping out the existence of a member state of the United Nations. Let me move over a little bit to happier instances. Instances which gave rise to excellent results and very, very positive results. First of all, Kishinev. Kishinev is a city which evokes a sense of foreboding in Jewish history. We think of Kishinev, we think of pogroms, and in particular the 1903 pogrom which took place the day after Pesach. One of the most moving experiences in my life was when I stood at the end of December 1998 in the old cemetery in Kishinev. It was a crisp winter day. The snow had fallen several days earlier, but it was untouched because no one had been there. The wind was rustling through the leaves. And my dear friend Herschel Lieber and I stood there and we looked at the matzebas, the tombstones of the Kedoshim who had been murdered in the pogrom of 1903. It's one of those occasions when the weight of Jewish history bears down on your shoulders. A short distance over, I had the privilege of standing at the kever of Rabbi Yehuda Leib Tzilson, the Rav of Kishinev, who was one of the founding members of World Aguda. He was killed tragically in the first wave of Nazi bombing in 1941. He was brought to rest in that cemetery, and they created a matzeba, a tombstone, out of part of the wall of his shul that had been destroyed, with the Aseret HaDibros, the Ten Commandments at the top, and the inscription of the matzeba below. In 1991, when the Soviet Union fell, the Vaad L'Hatzolos Nidchei Yisrael, an heroic organization based in Brooklyn, which does phenomenal work reawakening Jewish education in the former Soviet Union, got permission from the government of Moldova to re-establish really, a yeshiva in Kishinev. And the Kishinev yeshiva was conducted for 7 years in rented premises rented from the government. Out of the blue, a fax arrives in the yeshiva telling them that the government has decided to privatize the building and to sell it at public auction. And by the way, if you want to have it, you can have it. It'll cost you $180,000, which was a humongous sum in Moldovan terms, and you've got 9 days to come up with the money. I went into the office on Sunday, as I always did, prepared a letter in conjunction with Herschel Lieber of Lvov, who oversaw the Kishinev Yeshiva. That afternoon, it was faxed off to the Moldovan ambassador to the United Nations and also to the Moldovan ambassador in Washington. Tuesday morning, less than 48 hours later, I get a phone call from the Chargé d'Affaires of the Moldovan embassy in Washington, who tells me, I've spoken to our economics ministry, I've spoken to our justice department, I've spoken to my foreign ministry, and I've spoken to the woman who signed the privatization order. The privatization has been annulled. It was an amazing result in less than 48 hours. But during the course of preparing the letter, I discovered that this building was in fact originally a Jewish building. The Jewish community in Kishinev had bought the land in 1886, had built a shul on that lot, and the shul had been used until 1940, when the communists entered Moldova, and then 1941 when the Nazis followed. When the Nazis entered, it was per medium of the Einsatz, one of the Einsatzgruppen, the Roman killing squads that roamed around the Soviet Union, shooting Jews into mass graves, which they themselves had been forced to dig. On this occasion also, they rounded up all the Jews in the central square of the city, and they were about to take them into the forest to kill them. One of the Jews had the presence of mind to put up his hand, and he asked the commandant of the unit for a last request. It's customary, he said, for a condemned person to have a last request. What's your request? Said the commandant. He said, it is Mincha time, it's time for our afternoon prayers. Could we please recite those prayers in that building over there? He agreed. And they were taken in groups of 10 to 20, where they davened the last mincha, and then were taken out to be shot. That was the building. And I had the privilege of davening there with the boys for the couple of days that we were in Kishinev. 25 Jewish boys were sitting and learning Torah in Kishinev. I said to the bar, let's try and get this building back by way of restitution. They said, yes, let's try. I picked up the telephone to Ambassador Henry Clark in the State Department. Clark, a senior diplomat, was in charge of restitution. His object was to implement a very simple, a very firm United States policy. Property that was illegally seized has to be returned, period. I told him about the case. He said, it's very, very interesting. I'm going to Kishinev in 10 days' time. I said, that's wonderful. Can you take our case with you? He said, I can't really take any specific cases because I'm going there to talk about the principle of restitution. So I briefed him about the case in any event. He went, and as it happens, he did mention our case. And when Herschel Lieber and I went over there at the end of December, all doors were open to us. They were falling over themselves to help us. We walked into the Justice Department. Tell us what we can do to help you get this building back. We walked into the Foreign Ministry. They said, we understand the significance of this issue to the bilateral relations between Moldova and the United States, and so on. It was extraordinary. What had happened? The answer is that Henry Clark had mentioned our case, and that gave the imprimatur of the State Department and the government of the United States of America. 4 months earlier, the United States had sent over $5 million in humanitarian aid to Moldova. They were in the depths of a terrible, terrible financial crisis. They didn't have money to heat and to put electricity into hospitals. That's what the humanitarian aid was for. When we went there, we walked into national government offices. You needed a seeing eye dog to guide you around because the lights were so dim. They didn't have money for electricity. We had to wear sweaters and even overcoats in those buildings. They didn't have money for heating. We walked into the foreign ministry. I handed them over my card and I said, "Can we have your cards?" "We don't have cards. The country can't afford business cards for the foreign ministry officials." I said, "Well, can you give me a letterhead with all the details and just write the names of the people?" They didn't have that either. One of them took a piece of paper, wrote out all the details in longhand, folded over the paper, cut it in half, and gave me the part that was written on and kept the other part for future use. The country was poor. They were desperate for United States humanitarian aid. They were terrified that if we didn't get this building back, the United States would stop giving them aid. We didn't say a word. We didn't link it in any way, but the fact that Henry Clark had mentioned our case transformed the issue from a case of a little building in some back alley of Kishinev into a major item at or near the top of the agenda of United States-Moldovan bilateral relations. And the end result was that the VAD got the building back, and in my office I have a copy of the deed. I can't understand a word of it, it's all in some foreign language. But it deeds the building back to the VAD which is a phenomenal result. And let's finish off with a wonderful, wonderful episode about the colour from Berdichev. My dear friend Rabbi Yaakov Bleich, the chief rabbi of Ukraine, conducts a marvellous network of educational institutions in Kiev. One of them is a girls' school. And for some of the graduates, when they finish the school there, they come over to the United States and continue their studies in seminary. One such girl was living in Muncie, and she became a couple. She was engaged. They set the day for the wedding, and her parents were refused a visa to enter the United States by the US consulate in Kiev. I came into the case, and I started inquiring what had gone wrong here. Why would these people not give parents of a bride the chance to come and participate in their daughter's wedding? We found out through the State Department that the problem was that the consulate in Kiev looked with great suspicion on any application for a visa to come to the United States, because they were concerned that the Ukrainian people would come to the States on some pretext and then jump ship and stay here because of the much better living conditions. So we had to put together a brief demonstrating that the parents had extremely strong ties with Ukraine, such as would guarantee that they would return to Ukraine. And it wasn't difficult. Both of them had higher degrees in sciences and engineering. They had excellent jobs, earning a very, very good income. The mother's mother was still alive and she was caring for her. They had their own apartment, which was unusual, and they really had very strong anchors binding them to Ukraine. We put in a revised application, and because of the relationships that we had developed in the State Department, we were advised, don't put the application in this week, wait till next week. Why? Because the person in charge of visas is a hard, cold person. He's going on vacation next week. The person who will say, this is what happens when we build good relations. The The person who takes his place